Firstly, just know that editing is not just taking out the bad bits, it is actually building the entire film. Editing is basically directing for the second time, because you arrange the shots in the best order that tell the story, and you can completely change the film through your choices. If you give 10 editors the same footage, you will get 10 different films, so this is normally where the film really comes to life. For professional films and TV, most directors will not edit their own films. They will have a separate editor who can bring a fresh perspective, and they will work with that editor. But on a lot of low or no budget productions, directors will of course often edit their own films. This can be a good thing and a bad thing, because although you can keep costs and crew down and you probably know the footage very well, you might be too close to the project to make the best version of it. But with that said, here are some general tips on how to shape and refine your story using editing. First, if you have shot coverage, you can easily build a scene starting with your master shot and replacing sections of it with your favorite takes from the other angles, thinking about when you want the emphasis to be on which character. Then watch it through and trim it down until it's the most interesting version of the scene you can make. You don't need to stay seeing the shot you are hearing. A person speaking on camera doesn't need to be on camera the whole time. You might want to cut to a reaction shot from someone else over part of this. This can also help you join together two halves of two different takes. You hide the join by cutting to someone else. If there is no need to cut, then maybe don't cut. Don't feel you need to use all 5 angles just because you shot them. 1 or 2 might be enough. Normally, more cuts or shots will not make your scene better. In fact, the film will probably be better when you have nothing left to take away from it. One way to make your cuts smoother is to try cutting on an action. If your actor is doing some kind of movement, like getting up from a chair, it can be a good place to cut to the same action in a different shot, and it won't interrupt the flow of the scene. You could also try matching 2 different actions between 2 different scenes with a cut, as happens famously in 2001: A Space Odyssey, which can create a fun result too. Now, most cuts we talk about are traditional straight cuts where the picture and the audio change together, but give a thought to where you might want to use a J cut or an L cut. A J cut is where the picture and audio tracks look like a letter J, and so the audio you are hearing of the next scene starts before the picture changes. And an L cut is the opposite, where the picture changes before the sound. These really have specific uses in your story, but they are also good to know about. You can also add transitions, such as a crossfade between 2 different shots. There are millions of kinds of transitions, but I would suggest using them sparingly and only the very basic ones if you want your film to look professional. Also, make sure you are using them for a good reason. For example, using a crossfade is usually best to indicate the passage of time passing. When you cut to a new scene, the viewer might need a moment to realize where and when the scene is taking place, particularly if the new location is unfamiliar. So it's common for scenes to begin with a wide shot to establish this before moving to a closer angle. But you could also turn this on its head and conceal the nature of the location until later in the scene, in which case, start with a close-up. This can create mystery or suspense, and if you then cut the wide shot, you've just revealed some new information. Always ask what new information is a shot supplying, and if the answer is nothing, then maybe you don't need the shot and just try taking it out. Also, try not to be precious about your camera work, especially if you were the one filming yourself. A shot that you love might be getting in the way of making a better scene. With every scene, get in late and get out early. We don't need to see a lot of unnecessary stuff like people walking through doors. The shorter the better, so just get in and out of the scene as fast as you can. There's no need to linger on unnecessary bits of action, and it can make your audience bored very quickly. This can also be true if your actors have done some really long dramatic pauses. Too many of these can really slow a scene down. Keep an eye on the pacing of your edit. Are the gaps between every line too long, or have you done the opposite and taken out so much air that the film struggles to breathe? If so, try adding some time back in from what you've taken out and see if it flows better. Faster cuts might suit action, but be totally wrong for a slow or intimate scene. Always have some downtime away from the edit and then re-watch it later to see if the pacing feels like a good match for the scene's emotion, or if it feels odd and distracting. If you really feel like a scene just isn't working and you think you missed something crucial, then you can always try and arrange a reshoot. However, these can be expensive and pretty difficult if featuring your actors if they maybe look different or have had a haircut or something that you can't control or match the same. If you just need to go back to your location without your actors, then that can be a little bit easier. I've done this before when making my short film Janice. When filming, I had rather foolishly decided to not film any exteriors, as I didn't want to reveal that I had shot the film in the Philippines, as I thought this setting would be distracting from the story. But when I came to edit, I realized that it was now impossible to tell that the interior scenes were meant to be taking place in different houses, because there weren't any establishing shots. So a few months later, I went back to the house that I had been renting at the time, which is where we had done the filming, which I didn't live in anymore, and got a few quick establishing shots outside. And we also found a few other locations nearby, which we could pretend were the exteriors of the different houses. And then when I added these, the story became a lot clearer. If you feel like your scene might benefit from a totally different shot that you never even thought of filming, and you think this can help tell the story, and you have the budget, you might find a cheaper option than trying to film it as a reshoot is to use stock footage. Let's say you wanted something like a drone shot of a big city centre. This can be cheaper and less hassle than actually trying to film it. If you're adding credits, do not do a long opening title sequence at the start. Nobody except you will care, least of all your audience, or worse, festival programmers who just want to get to the story and see if you can tell a good one. Save the credits for the end, and even then, keep them short. Getting feedback on your film is very important. Show a rough cut to some trusted people who you think will give you an impartial opinion about it. And then, especially if you're editing yourself, you may be too close to it, so step away for a while and return to it with fresh eyes before doing another cut. Normally the editor will create a cut, the director will review it and then give any notes, and then the process will continue until the director decides to lock the picture, meaning no more changes will be made to the duration of the shots. Only then will the next steps, such as the sound design and the color grading, happen. So if you're doing everything yourself, only start these next steps after you've stopped making changes to the edit, and this will save you a ton of time. Happy editing.